The crew chief's warning came flat and cold. Stay out of the cockpit. She didn't argue, didn't flash credentials, just stepped back and watched as ground crews swarmed the F-22 Raptor. Then the radio crackled. Emergency. Pilot down. Mission critical. No one else qualified within 50 miles. She moved toward the aircraft, helmet in hand, eyes steady. 60 seconds later, she was strapped into $40 million of America's deadliest technology, throttling toward the runway. The ground crew could only watch as they're dismissed. Observer became something else entirely. This is the story of the woman who wasn't supposed to fly. Dawn broke cold across the secure airbase, cutting sharp shadows across the tarmac. F-22 Raptors sat in perfect formation, their angular profiles looking more like alien spacecraft than machines, built by human hands. These weren't just fighter jets. They were apex predators of the sky. Stealth technology wrapped around, thrust-vectoring engines and weapon systems that could engage enemies before they even knew death was coming. Ground crews moved with surgical precision around each aircraft. Every movement counted. Every check mattered. Fuel trucks hummed as they topped of tanks holding thousands of pounds of jet fuel. Hydraulic systems cycled through their ranges. Diagnostic computers chirped confirmations that every critical system was green and mission ready. The morning air thrummed with controlled energy, the kind that builds before operations where perfection isn't optional. It's the only acceptable standard. She emerged from the operations building wearing standard-issue flight overalls. Nothing special, nothing that marked her as different from a dozen other personnel moving around the flight line. No squadron patch on her shoulder, no unit insignia, no name tape that would tell anyone who she was or why she was there. To Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the crew chief managing PI flight operations, she looked like another contractor or administrative officer, someone whose job involved paperwork, not afterburners. Rodriguez had spent 23 years on flight lines from Nevada to Korea. He knew the difference between people who belonged near combat aircraft and people who didn't. And this woman, walking casually toward his F-22 with her hands in her pockets, definitely didn't belong. Stay out of the cockpit, he said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd given this warning countless times. Not shouted, not angry, just matter of fact, like telling someone the bathroom was for customers only. He gestured toward the red safety line painted 15 feet from the aircraft, then turned back to his checklist. Conversation over. Threat neutralized. She stopped, nodded once. No argument, no protest, no demanding to speak with someone in charge. She simply acknowledged his command and stepped back toward the shadows near the hangar, finding a spot where she could watch without interfering. Most people would have gotten defensive, would have insisted they had clearance, made phone calls, created a scene. She just complied, fading into the background like smoke. Rodriguez went back to work, already forgetting about her. Another day, another curious civilian kept away from classified hardware. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that her name existed in databases he'd never access. Her security clearance operated at levels so classified that even knowing those levels existed required special authorization. The handful of people on base aware of her presence had been briefed through channels that bypassed normal squadron communications entirely. Colonel Martinez, watching from the operations center 300 yards away, understood the situation perfectly. She was here for reasons that couldn't be explained to ground crews, carrying credentials that would raise more questions than they answered. The mission required her presence, but operational security demanded she remain invisible until the moment she was needed, and Martinez had a sinking feeling that moment was coming soon. The morning routine continued around her position in the shadows. Ground crews completed their choreographed ballet of preparation. Engines test-fired with screaming roars that shook the air. Control surfaces flexed through their full ranges, ailerons and stabilizers moving like living tissue. Weapon systems cycled through diagnostic sequences, confirming that missiles and cannons were ready if needed. The F-22 is transformed from static museum pieces into living predators, their systems awakening with electronic whispers and mechanical precision. She remained motionless, watching without judgment as Rodriguez maintained his protective stance around the lead aircraft. His caution was appropriate, even commendable. The F-22 wasn't just expensive hardware. It was a flying repository of America's most classified technologies. Radar-absorbent materials that cost more than gold. Avionics that could track hundreds of targets simultaneously. Weapons integration that made the aircraft an extension of the pilot's own nervous system. Rodriguez's job was keeping unauthorized personnel away from all of it. He was good at his job. What he couldn't know was that the carefully planned morning routine was about to detonate. The first indication came as a burst of static over the squadron frequency, cutting through the steady background chatter of PI flight communications. Controllers in the operations center straightened at their consoles, hands moving toward switches, waiting for clarification. The transmission that followed was clipped, urgent, delivered with the control tension that marked genuine emergencies rather than training exercises. Tower, Angel 7 is down a pilot. Medical emergency, effective immediately. The voice belonged to Major Chern, whose legendary calm couldn't quite hide the stress underneath. In the background of her transmission, people could hear raised voices, the sound of equipment moving fast, the organized chaos of a medical situation developing in real time. Pilot is being transported to medical facility now. Aircraft is fueled, armed, and configured for scheduled readiness intercept. Repeat. Angel 7 is mission ready, but pilot is unavailable. In the operations center, screens flickered as duty officers pulled up mission, schedules and pilot rosters with frantic keystrokes. The readiness intercept wasn't a drill or training exercise. Intelligence had detected unidentified aircraft probing the outer edges of restricted airspace for the past 2 hours. The pattern suggested reconnaissance, possibly testing response times and capabilities. The F-22 designated Angel 7 was loaded with live air-to-air missiles and configured for immediate deployment. The machine was ready, but machines don't fly themselves. Rodriguez heard the transmission through his headset and felt ice water hit his stomach. Angel 7 was his aircraft. The Raptor he'd personally prepped through 4 hours of meticulous inspection. He'd verified every system, checked every connection, confirmed every reading. The bird was perfect, ready to fight. But without a pilot, it might as well be a $40 million paperweight. Control, this is Ground 6, Rodriguez called, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline starting to spike. Angel 7 is fully prepped and green across the board. Mission ready. Do we have a replacement pilot inbound? The pause that followed stretched too long, way too long. In the background, keyboards clattered as personnel frantically contacted reserve pilots, checked training schedules, calculated drive times from off-base housing. The answer, when it finally came, carried the weight of bad news delivered by professionals who'd rather be saying anything else. Negative. Ground 6, all qualified pilots are either airborne on other missions or beyond immediate recall. Estimate 47 minutes minimum for nearest available pilot to reach your location. 47 minutes. In aerial intercept situations, that might as well be 47 hours. The unidentified aircraft would complete whatever reconnaissance they'd planned, collect whatever intelligence they were after, and disappear back across international boundaries. Mission accomplished. While America's most advanced fighter sat useless on the tarmac, like a museum display. Rodriguez scanned the flight line desperately, hoping to spot someone, anyone, with the credentials and qualifications to climb into that cockpit. Squadron pilots were scattered across training missions and administrative duties. The handful of qualified instructors were committed to other aircraft or grounded by maintenance schedules. His eyes swept across buildings, vehicles, personnel, and stopped. She was moving out of the shadows, not running, not rushing, but walking with purpose, with a kind of unhurried confidence that belongs to people who know exactly what they're doing and don't need to prove it. Helmet already in hand, flight gear that had appeared from nowhere, moving toward Angel 7 like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Rodriguez opened his mouth to repeat his earlier warning, then stopped cold. Something in her posture triggered recognition patterns he couldn't quite identify. This wasn't the casual curiosity of a contractor. This wasn't the nervous energy of someone out of their depth. This was something else entirely. "Ma'am, I need to see your," he began, reaching for standard protocol. Her hand moved to a pocket with mechanical precision, producing credentials that made Rodriguez's words die in his throat. The classification markings alone were beyond anything he'd ever seen. Access codes that didn't match any standard military format. A photograph that matched her face. And authorization signatures from offices he didn't know existed. As his brain struggled to process what he was seeing, she was already moving past him toward the aircraft ladder. The transformation happened in seconds. One moment, she was the dismissed observer they'd forgotten about. The next moment, she was climbing into the cockpit with movements so fluid and practiced that it was clear she'd done this hundreds of times before, possibly in aircraft even more classified than the F-22. Rodriguez stood frozen, watching through the canopy as she strapped in. Her hands moved across the instrument panel with zero hesitation. No searching for switches, no consulting checklists, no pause to orient herself to the layout. Her fingers found controls like they'd been born there, flipping switches in sequences that brought systems online in perfect order. Tower, Angel 7 ready for immediate launch. Her voice came through the radio, calm, professional, zero nervousness, like she'd been doing this her entire life. In the operations center, controllers exchanged glances. Her voice carried none of the subtle stress markers they'd learned to recognize in pilots facing unfamiliar situations. She sounded like someone reporting for routine duty, not someone climbing into an unfamiliar aircraft under emergency conditions. Angel 7, you are cleared for immediate departure. Vector to 70. Climb to Angels to 0. Contact approach on tactical frequency. Roger, cleared for departure. She acknowledged with crisp precision. Then she advanced the throttles. The F-22 is twin Pratt and, with the engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, building to the crescendo that always made ground crew step back instinctively, but instead of the gradual increase typical of cautious pilots, she pushed directly into afterburner range. The Raptor shot forward like a missile released from its rail, acceleration so violent that it left heat shimmer in the air behind it. Rodriguez had watched thousands of takeoffs in his career, but few combined this level of aggressive power with such surgical control. The aircraft lifted off exactly at the optimal rotation point marked on the runway, climbing at an angle that spoke of someone who understood every limitation and capability of the machine beneath them, not flying it, wearing it. Jesus Christ, Eamon Collins whispered, lowering his binoculars as the F-22 disappeared into the morning sky, leaving only thunder and contrails. Who the hell is she? Nobody answered. Nobody could. In the squadron ready room, pilots monitoring the tactical frequency fell silent as her voice filled the speakers. She wasn't reading responses from checklist cards. She wasn't consulting reference materials or asking for clarification. Her communications flowed with the natural rhythm of someone who'd conducted similar intercepts hundreds of times, possibly in theaters of operation these pilots had never seen and never would. Control, Angel 7 has radar contact, bearing to 85, range 40 miles. 2 bogeys maintaining course toward restricted airspace. Request intercept authorization. The report was delivered with matter-of-fact tone, not announcing a potential international incident, just providing routine information. The simulation protocols that followed were surgical in their precision. Her maneuvering demonstrated complete mastery of the F-22's stealth characteristics, positioning for intercepts that maximize tactical advantage, while minimizing detection probability. Each course correction, each altitude change, each communication with ground control reflected training that went far beyond standard squadron qualifications. Major Thompson, the squadron's most experienced pilot with over 3,000 hours in the Raptor, leaned back in his chair as he monitored her performance. His expression was unreadable. Whoever trained her, he said quietly. They weren't teaching civilian aviation. The question everyone was thinking finally found voice. Who is she? Colonel Martinez, monitoring from the operations center, provided the only answer anyone would receive. She's flown darker skies than any of us can imagine. The intercept lasted 90 minutes. Radio traffic painted a picture of flying that belonged in classified after-action reports rather than routine training logs. She identified the unidentified aircraft, established radar lock, executed textbook intercept procedures, and escorted them out of restricted airspace without a single wasted movement. Professional, surgical, perfect. The F-22 returned with the same precision that had marked its departure. She touched down exactly on the runway centerline with controlled power that separated professionals from pretenders. No bounce, no drift correction, just whisper soft contact that barely kissed the concrete. The landing of someone who understood the aircraft's handling characteristics at a cellular level. Rodriguez stood at his position beside the taxiway, expression unreadable as he watched the Raptor taxi back. The past 2 hours had fundamentally altered his understanding of everything he'd witnessed that morning. Radio chatter from the intercept had described flying that suggested combat experience in places none of them had clearance to know about. The engines wound down with their characteristic whine, Ground crews moved forward to begin post-flight procedures. But their usual efficiency was tempered by something approaching reverence. Word had spread through the flight line. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone understood they'd witnessed something extraordinary. She climbed down from the cockpit with the same fluid movements that had marked her entry, removed her helmet with economical precision. No drama, no visible satisfaction from mission accomplished, just professional completion of assigned duties. Her flight suit showed no stress marks, no indication of the high-G maneuvering that had characterized the intercept. Rodriguez stepped forward, but this time his approach carried formal respect reserved for senior officers or visiting dignitaries, recognition that every assumption he'd made that morning had been fundamentally wrong. He stopped precisely at arm's length, offering a single sharp nod that belonged more in honor, guard ceremonies than flight line operations. "Ma'am," he said simply. The word carried implications that hadn't existed hours earlier. She handed him the helmet without comment, her eyes already moving toward the hangar complex where administrative requirements waited. No debriefing for the ground crew. No explanation of credentials or background. Whatever classification protected her identity remained intact, leaving only the evidence of demonstrated capability. "Clean aircraft," she said, the only acknowledgement of the morning's events. Then she turned and walked toward the operations building, her stride carrying the same unhurried confidence that had marked her initial appearance. Rodriguez watched her disappear through the hangar doors, then looked down at the helmet in his hands. Standard issue. But somehow it felt heavier than regulation weight. Around him, ground crews continued post-flight procedures with unusual quiet, processing what they witnessed. By afternoon shift change, the story was already moving through base communications with the inevitable distortion of military legend-making. Details would shift and grow with each telling. Some would claim she'd engaged enemy aircraft in a dogfight. Others would say she'd been a test pilot for experimental programs. The truth would remain classified, but the core would remain unchanged. She took the Raptor up cold and flew it clean. What nobody would ever know was where she'd learned to fly like that, what conflicts she'd seen, what missions she'd flown in aircraft that didn't officially exist. Her file would remain sealed in databases, accessible only to a handful of people with clearances that operated beyond normal classification systems. Rodriguez stood on the flight line long after she disappeared, looking at Angel 7. The aircraft showed no signs of the morning's emergency deployment. Systems green, fuel depleted but easily replaced. A routine mission in every measurable way, except for the lingering question that would haunt him for years. Who was she? The answer would never come, and maybe that was exactly how it was supposed to be. Some stories aren't meant to have endings. Some pilots aren't meant to have names. They exist in the margins of official records. Flying missions that never happened. Protecting a country that will never know their names. She was one of them. A ghost in the machine, a shadow in the sky. And somewhere, in restricted airspace most people will never know exists, she was probably already flying again. If this story got your heart racing, hit that like button. Subscribe to Silent Warriors for more stories about the heroes who operate in the shadows, doing the impossible while the rest of us sleep. Drop a comment and tell me what you think happened next, because in the world of classified operations, the most interesting stories are the ones we'll never fully know. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and remember, the most dangerous warriors are the ones you never see coming.